At 5 tonight, Connecticut's Attorney General now pushing for the state to take custody of several neglected horses. 9 horses were found malnourished and seized from Laurel Ledge Farm in Oakdale last year. According to the Attorney General, state animal control authorities urged the horse's owner to consult with a veterinarian to improve their health. But when authorities did a follow-up check, they found no medical care had been given and their condition was actually worse. One horse has since died. Now the Attorney General wants the state to take permanent custody of the horses.
This is a really, really tough situation, and it happens much more than people would guess. When I first became Attorney General, we had a major seizure of animals in the Suffield area of more than 200 animals, not just horses, but other farm animals. And these are all obviously living animals. And it's sad and tragic to see them in such bad shape. We're talking about severely malnourished. Each of the horses were lame and limping in some way or another.
The original owner of the horses has been charged with 9 counts of cruelty to animals. That case is in Norwich Superior Court.